morning, good afternoon, good evening. I have argued on this platform that meaningful democratic change in Zimbabwe can only come from the opposition implementing the democratic reforms necessary to end Zanu PF's dictatorial powers. It is important to understand that difference. How else are you going to achieve a meaningful democratic change? Some people will say, oh, well, let's pressure Zanu PF to implement reforms. Zanu PF will never reform itself out of office. So that route is a dead end. The other alternative was considered in the late 1990s when people were considering, should we take up arms again? And I think the wise decision was, no, let's elect opposition leaders who will implement the democratic reforms once they are elected in office. And let's be honest, the last 25 years, the nation has managed to elect a significant number of opposition leaders to implement those reforms. The only problem is they have failed to implement those reforms. They had the golden opportunity to implement those reforms during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. They failed to implement even one reform. Why? Because Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office, and they forgot about the reforms. This is at the heart of our political problem. We have had an opposition grouping whose number one task was to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And in 25 years, including the 5 years in the GNU, they failed to implement reforms. To keep on believing that that opposition is serving a purpose is at the heart of why we are in this situation. And we must address that problem. Here is one of the opposition leaders, Gift Ostalos Spanda, being interviewed on that very point by the journalist Blessed Nklanga. Let's listen to this. I'll just play half of it to address one issue and then play the rest of it to address the second issue.
A path to your station of choice. You've controlled council. At one point, you're the majority in the House of Assembly in Parliament. You have been accused as a collective, as the way that you talk about, of dismal failure in performance at local authorities, resultantly in the almost amputation of service delivery in Araz, death of Blawayo as a town. And this has happened under the watch of the cadres that you say are of alternative change. Why should they trust you then with the keys to status?
Look, there are two fundamental problems with the running of local authorities in this country. One are external problems, the others are internal. So the first external problems that we face in our 2 decades of running council is that when Engineer Mutsuri was the mayor of Harare, he had executive powers. And Zanu PF knew that local authorities would be assigned for the opposition to show how it is able to govern. From that time, there was a project to this very day to make sure that council is not functional by taking away powers from the Airways Councils Act and placing them in the Ministry of Local Government, to the extent that to buy toilet paper for local authority, you would need approval of local authority. I'm dramatizing the extent of control of local authority. So that is the fundamental external problems that the city faces. If you look at Bulawayo now, we've had decades of failing to complete the project to get water to the city. Why? It is not in the interest of Zanu PF for water to be availed, because that glory will go to the opposition. It is in the interest of Harare that sewer continues to cause havoc in the city so that Harare residents will not vote for the democratic opposition. It is in the interest of the regime in Harare that there is no water, that there are potholes all over, because they will ensure that the Senate does not allocate funds, devolution funds.
Well, let's stop it there. This is an important point. The opposition in Zimbabwe was elected for the primary purpose of implementing the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF exercising dictatorial powers. This was at the heart of it. This dictatorial powers is not only applicable in local government, it's in central government itself. And the point that must be emphasized is the opposition had the opportunity to implement those reforms. So the question is, why have they failed to implement those reforms? And the truth is, they failed because Mugabe bribed them during the GNU when they had the golden opportunity to implement those reforms. Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office, the E-class Mercedes-Benz for all the ministers, deputy ministers, the two deputy prime ministers, and the Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai himself. Very generous salaries for all round. Very generous. For Morgan Tsvangirai himself, the $4 million Highlands mansion, etc., etc. And the MDC leadership were busy enjoying themselves. They forgot about the reforms. That is the reality that we've got to face and deal with. They failed to implement even one reform during that period. And so when the GNU was coming to an end in 2013, SADC realized that without those reforms, democratic reforms, Zanu PF was going to rig those elections again. And SADC leaders, credit where credit is due, called a special SADC summit meeting in Maputo in June 2013. And they told Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends that you should not go into those elections without reforms. Because if you do, you lose. I think SADC would have insisted on holding on to that until they had the explanation from Zanu PF. It was Patrick Chamisa, who was then the Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, who called a press conference when he came back from Maputo and told the nation and the in the SADC leaders at large that there were no outstanding reforms to be implemented. And he could say it with confidence. I am the Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, and I know that MDC leaders have not submitted one reform proposal to Parliament, and it's outstanding. Indeed, they've never submitted even one single reform in the 5 years of the GNU. So we should postpone the 2013 elections on the basis of we want to implement reforms. What reforms? And even SADC leaders realized with that argument, there was no way for them to go. And so they dropped the whole thing. The 2013 elections went ahead, and Zanu PF blatantly rigged those elections. What some people have failed to understand here is the statements that have come from some of the MDC, CCC leaders themselves. People like David Coulthard. In his book, which I have quoted on countless times, David Coulthard admits that the 2013 elections were flawed. So flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. The question is, why didn't he withdraw? And he explains why. He and his MDC Nuwe group were prepared to withdraw only if Morgan Changirai and his MDCT guys were prepared to form a coalition, because only then could they be assured that they would not participate. But when the coalition failed to materialize, both of them participated, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they'll be giving Zanu PF legitimacy. But they went ahead regardless, because they also knew Zanu PF was giving away a few Gravitrans seats, and they wanted a cut of that. Why some Zimbabweans have failed to understand that argument is beggars belief. Even now, with the benefit of hindsight, some people still refuse to accept that. But that is at the heart of the problem. That is the truth. And to pretend otherwise is nonsensical. I'll just play the rest of this video clip.
We only allocated this time because there was now a consensus, an agreement, and the marriage of convenience between the current leadership of the city of Harare and the ruling establishment for Geopomona project. That is only time where devolution funds were allocated to the cities. All along, there will be bureaucratic red tape and problems. When Zimbabweans voted for monies to be given across the country for cities to be run. So that's the external problems. But because of that, it does not absolve us from also solving our own problems within the city. The first one, we've acknowledged this publicly and we'll say it. Our lessons going into the future is to say, we have to look at the quality of councillors that we deploy. Ordinary Zimbabweans have never had interest in local authorities. So when we make calls for people to come and contest, it has always been a space that everyone, professionals, people who are capacitated to run the city will shy away. We've invited citizens with capabilities to join the movement. so that we are able to have quality to run our cities. If you look at our deployment policy in 2023, we were looking more on quality rather than quantity. If you look at the mayors who were deployed in cities across, with Dr. Mazorera in Kwekwe, with capable Ian Makoni in Harare, with Senator David Coulthard in Bulawayo, we had Chantel in Maswingo, a banker, we had Anna Sande, a graduate in Epworth. So we were looking at quality over quantity. Zanu PF, Mhlanga, had a quantitative majority in.
Well, this is an interesting point. On the one hand, he's admitting that MDC CCC had failed to attract quality Zimbabweans to join the party. And I can tell you that one of the reasons why we have not had quality leaders in both Zanu PF and MDC CCC is because of the politics. Zimbabwe's political system is so dysfunctional, it attracts thugs. You have to be a thug to be a politician in Zimbabwe. MDC leaders failed to implement the reforms that would have changed our political system and allowed quality to emerge. By failing to implement reforms, it left the political system a sewage pond. If you go fishing in a sewage pond, don't expect to catch quality fish. Both Zanu PF and the opposition. And for anyone of quality in Zanu PF or the opposition, they would have realized that by failing to implement reforms here, this is going nowhere. Even the quality is talking about there. Earlier on, I was showing you the book, David Coulthard's book, in which he himself admitted that the election process was so flawed, so illegal, the only logical thing to do was to withdraw. Why didn't he withdraw? He too wanted to have a cut in some of those gravitating seats. And he admits it. And he has been participating in these flawed elections for the same reason. David Coulthard participated in the 2023 elections as a councillor and then subsequently became the mayor of Bulawayo. The question that most people would ask is, has the service delivery in Bulawayo improved? The answer is no. And Siziba himself acknowledged the reasons why. Because government interferes. And in any case, you cannot have a city like Bulawayo as if it's an oasis in the middle of the desert. When the whole national economy is collapsing, you cannot expect that somehow a city like Bulawayo, because it has got a quality mayor, will be thriving. It's impossible. That is part of the argument here. This is why implementing those reforms were absolutely necessary. He, Siziba, participated in 2023 as one of the contesting members of parliament. He was one of the lucky ones who did win a seat in that election. Let's just play the rest of it, because that is what is coming next.
But we had a qualitative majority because they deployed as usual. The octogenarians, the nanogenarians will be sleeping after maybe drinking a cup of coffee. We were focusing on the quality of people because we knew Parliament was going to be an important vehicle for our reform agenda. So if you look at the recalls, there was a design and science into the madness that Chabangu was doing. It was not just random. They were looking at the people of substance that were deployed. Are of no substance. So there are people who they were not recalled for various reasons, because remember, they could not recall everyone because they also needed political finance money. Zanu also didn't want a by-election. So they targeted people that they knew that were going to reject the tomfoolery currently happening.
Sorry, we're having problems with quality there. My apologies, we've lost the sound there. But the point he's trying to make there is that the elections, and he and others were recalled by Savango, as many people know. I think it's about 20 or so who were recalled. His argument here is that only the quality guys were recalled. That is, of course, nonsense. Because he had just earlier on said that we were concentrating on quality. In other words, all those who were on the Triple C ticket were quality leaders. So those who were recalled on what basis? The truth of the matter is, those who were recalled were considered by Savango to be close Chamisa loyalists, and he recalled them. The rest, who were willing to accept Savango as their leader, they were not recalled. And the second point is, those who were not recalled, if they were quality, what have they accomplished in Parliament? Nothing. Just as those Triple C councillors in cities and towns across the country, what have they accomplished? Nothing. The people of Zimbabwe have got to wake up to that reality, that we cannot continue to have this mediocre government and local authority, because we will continue to have that mediocre as long as Zanu PF is able to rig elections and stay in power. And this Chamisa and company guys are going to participate in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that if you participate, you give Zanu PF legitimacy. But as long as they know if we participate, we'll win some of the few gravy train seats, they will continue to participate. It is now up to the people themselves to realize that they are being taken for a ride here and stop participating in flawed elections. That is at the heart of this issue. We need quality opposition leaders who will implement the reforms to make sure that we finally end this case of rigged elections and bad governance. At the present moment, Chamisa and company are taking advantage of the ignorance of millions of Zimbabweans out there who do not understand what reforms are, much less how they were to be implemented. But even those people, I think they need to wake up also to the reality that Chamisa lied to them. It is most unfortunate that some of those millions still accept that as much as Chamisa said he had plugged the vote rigging loopholes to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections, they also accept that Zanu PF did rig the elections, the 2023. But they cannot reconcile themselves with the view that Chamisa lied to them, because they've got this personality cult mentality that makes them believe that Chamisa is a demigod who can do no wrong. And it is at the heart of this problem. In this day and age, how could anyone consider a mere mortal a demigod? And in this particular case, not just any ordinary mortal, but one with a well-documented track record of being corrupt, incompetent, a liar, and a conman. As much as Sisiva in that interview would admit that Triple C, since its participation in 2023 has given Zanu PF legitimacy, it has failed to deliver in any meaningful way. And government is doing, Zanu PF is doing as it pleases. In local government, even those towns like Bulawayo that has got Triple C mayors, like David Coulthard, they are still experiencing the same trials and tribulations that the rest of the country is facing. As I said, it is absolutely nonsensical that we can have a situation where local authority is doing well while central government is going to the dogs. We need to sort out our political system, dysfunctional political system, because only then can we have quality members of parliament and quality councillors. The fight here, if we are serious about having meaningful democratic change in Zimbabwe, the fight is that we should elect opposition leaders who will deliver those democratic changes that we wanted, that the nation has been dying for all these years. The fact that MDC, Triple C leaders have failed to implement even one token reform does not mean we don't need reforms. We still need them. And it doesn't mean no one else can implement those reforms. You just need to look at quality leaders who can do that. We were easily conned by Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends. They even called themselves the Movement for Democratic Change, and we believed that they would deliver the democratic changes that the nation wanted. But after 25 years, including 5 years in the GNU, without even one token reform implemented, the people have got to wake up to the reality that these MDC Triple C leaders are not up to the task. Remove them and elect competent opposition leaders, and the country will recover. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.